Welcome back. This is the Table Dragon, Dragon Con's official tabletop streaming. Uh, I have some guests with us today, Abby and Jared. Who am I? My name is Rush Lalaviva, and I am the director of tabletop panels at Dragon Con. I have the illustrious distinction of being able to win the top GM award at Dragon Con twice, as well as having done some publishing work in the industry for many years. So, Abby, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Abby. I go by Woody X Witch on most of my socials. You can find me running mostly Dragon Age games with the Worlds Guild and just kind of out in the world. You can also find me doing cosplay, also for Dragon Age, but other things as well, like Critical Role. And you will also find me doing the socials for Dragon Con Tabletop Track.
Jared?
Hi, I'm Jared. I go by Penguin Sushi on most of my social media stuff. Just another gamer, friend of Rush, and enjoy this kind of stuff.
Okay, and Jared, of course, was my co-host with the Table Dragon podcast, which you can still find on anywhere that you can find podcasts. So today we're talking about reading the room. This is the part 2 of that topic. And we're going to be talking about some more of the nitty-gritty aspects of reading the room. So when we did the first episode, I neglected to mention or go over why reading the room is so important. So to be clear, what we're talking about now is the skills that veteran game masters often display. When I watch a veteran game master, and then I go and I turn around and I go watch a beginning game master. Not to say that either one is better or worse, but I noticed that veterans tend to have certain skills that come with the territory. And one of those is reading the room. So why is reading the room so important? So to be clear, reading the room means looking at your players, your group, understanding if they're excited or not excited, if they're bored, engaged, if they find something funny or they find something dreadful. That's reading the room. And the reason it's so important, and it may be even more important than your ability to tell a story, is that by reading the room, you can tailor your game specifically to your players. Do any of you guys want to chime in on that?
I mean, I think you're saying it pretty well so far. I mean, that is sort of the point of reading that room, is to figure out what's working for the group you're running a game for. Right. Or even playing with. Like, you can be a player and read the room too. Kind of pull into, like, this is what my character would do, but is that going to make the table uncomfortable?
Yes, 100%.
Or even is it just going to contribute to the fun or bog things down?
Mm-hmm. But this isn't player tips. This is GM tips.
Right. But we can segue a little bit. Jared, one of my favorite stories is about reading the room in the context of a player. Is I remember playing that Star Wars game way back when, and I read the room and I was like, okay, the character that I had in mind was not going to work. It's going to cause the whole campaign to kind of fall apart. So I immediately changed my character and came back next session and said, guys, this is my character now. But okay, so talking about tailoring the game to your players, that seems to be an obvious one, right? You want to play up the aspects of the game that excite your players, that get them excited. Mm-hmm. But then let's talk about the smaller details of how to do it and then what to do. So if you are in the middle of a game and you find yourself watching the players get more and more excited, what you can do is you can build up that moment. You can start creating rising tension, especially if you notice that your players, you have their attention. So you can create that satisfying story arc. If you notice, for example, that the players really, really want to do X, you can save that up to be the climax of the game. Mm-hmm. And the way I discovered this was long ago. I used to, when I first started using music in all my games, sometimes the music would get to a very climactic pitch, And by just complete happenstance, the action of the game would reach that same climax. And then the players were like, "Oh, your timing was perfect." And later on, I would reflect, and I'm like, "My timing wasn't perfect. That was just an accident." And then I said, "Aha!" The light bulb came on over my head, and I said, "Okay, if the music swells, I need to have something kind of interesting happen."
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I remember playing the Stranger Things Dread game with you, and I think we had gotten out of the fun house into Spooky Rooney alternate parallel universe
Mhm.
space, and the music went, and I was like, "Oh my
you
god!"
know,
And I
that
remember
that
saying, "Did you do that on purpose?" And you were like, "Moving on."
actually, in that case, I did, because since then I've learned how to use music, and we had these wonderful devices where you can hit pause, hit play. Before, I used to use cassette tapes, so I was
Mhm.
almost a slave to what was going to happen on the
Right.
soundtrack. I could I could pause, maybe rewind a little bit, or maybe fast forward a little bit, but that was it. Um, but I remember in that case, yes, I did, because I had all this training essentially
Mhm.
from previous experience.
Yeah, and
So,
4 years later, I still remember it.
wow, that says a lot. Well, thank you, first of all, but that does say a lot. So, I think reading the room can create those really, really amazing moments, because what you're doing is you're looking at your players, and you're figuring out when it is that you want to seize on those moments. You're like, aha, this is when I want to seize on the moment. This is when I have their attention. Here's where I can introduce element X or element Y into the game. And we'll get into that in our next episode when we talk about thinking on the fly. That's a really good way to think on the fly. So do you guys have any comments about that so far, on seizing on certain moments, or capitalizing on certain moments that you've noticed?
I think we talked a little bit about this last time,
Mhm.
but the idea of tailoring games and capitalizing on what your players are doing. There's been so many times where I think, okay, I've written this one shot. It will take about 3 hours, and it ends up taking about 6 over 2 sessions because the players role play so much. And as a DM, I'm like, thank goodness I have time to sort of prep a little bit more now that I kind of know what it is you like in your game. Do you want to talk to more of the villagers? Do you want to, go break into houses? And the more they role play with each other, the more time I have to kind of decide, okay, how does this house look that they're going to break into next? Or, who are the people that live in this village that I hadn't thought of before because I didn't know how much they were going to talk to people. Let me whip out all of my Barbie and Zelda names that I've just got in my back pocket all the time.
That's a great tip. Jared, how about yourself?
Apart from the fact that one does not simply one shot a one shot, um, that's a whole other. Yeah, so what you're talking about really is, and when you alluded to thinking on the fly, to me, I mean, these things seems really related. Is being reactive in a certain way. I liked your example about the music. That really hadn't occurred to me before. I like to put on tabletopaudio.com does a lot of really great just kind of background stuff. And there's not a lot of swell to it, and there's not it it makes a nice background texture, and it helps kind of fill out the atmosphere of the room. I've found that when I try to use music dramatically, like what Rush is talking about, it's one too many things to take on as a GM. And I think especially new GM, since that's kind of who we're talking to, I think you're going to find that a lot with them. If you're not used to this, it can just be one too many things to track. And you might just deem that it's not necessary. Hey, if you want to do it, I mean, go for it. That's great. But I really like the thing that you said about actually being reactive with the music, kind of reading the room and what the music is doing to it. So if you are using something that has a little bit more dynamics, has a little bit more variation in the tension levels in it, if you know that that's a possibility and you can kind of be ready to capitalize on that, right? That's a really interesting idea. It's kind of like it is reading the room in a sense, but it's almost reading how the room is changed or is going to change based on something that you're introducing to it, even if it's not conscious. Did that make sense?
No, that makes a lot of sense. And actually, I'm really glad that you brought that up, Jared, because you are right. Sometimes, um, sometimes people aren't good DJs. Like you said, there's just one too many things going on if you try to introduce music to the game. So it's not, you're right, it's not for everybody. But
that could be a topic on its own, is
sure,
using atmosphere and music and stuff like that to enhance games. But that's another topic.
tabletop audio is a excellent piece of advice. It's just an excellent resource. And
if you want to use it to add a little bit of tension, the thing that I do most often, especially in D&D games, is I'll use their sound pad, which he's got just a bunch of different sounds, and you can start and stop them at will, and you can kind of set a scene, and you can actually save scenes with that as well. But you can kind of set a scene, and then I'll do that, and I'll have that just kind of running in the background. If the characters are going through like a forest or whatever, there's like background forest sounds, and like sounds of walking or trees or whatever. And then you can have a set of, he's got like dramatic music. So like when the goblins jump out or whatever, and there's going to be like an encounter, I can just reach over and hit play on that combat music over top of the forest thing that's going on. And then you'll kind of have both of those. And then as the combat wraps up, I just go over and hit stop, and it kind of fades out and goes away. So it's kind of a midway step between I'm going to play DJ and I'm just going to set it and forget it, right? It's another option. But I like how that can, your idea about how that can help with reading the room or play into influencing the room or reading what's going on.
Right, and we could do a whole other episode just about putting music in your games. But one thing that ambiences really help with is that an ambience track is usually about an hour, and a music track is like 3 to 4 minutes.
Right.
And so you have to kind of stay on top of making sure it repeats if you're using a music track. But if it's an ambience, you can just kind of let it roll for a while and go from there.
Absolutely. I agree with all of that. So reading the room is really, really key for creating those really amazing climactic moments in your game. If I wasn't so good at that skill, I think I would have real problems. I would have had real problems in my long career as a game master doing that, creating those really, really climactic scenes. A lot of times when I'm narrating, I'm watching the faces of my audience. And as their eyes light up to certain parts, those are the parts I'll emphasize. And then after doing it for so many times with certain audiences, I'm like, I know what's going to hook them. So for example, in a game I just ran, we're playing in a sort of Celtic Irish setting, and all the players happen to be women, and they're all playing sisters from the same family. And they are really, these sisters, these 5 sisters are really tied up with their mother and grandmother, who have the ability to see the second sight, basically.
Cool.
And there's a moment in which they had saved the village, and their mom comes down, and everybody's remarking, and she's like, well, of course, these fine girls helped us out, because these are the finest girls that anyone could ever want. And I could just tell that was the moment, right? And so I let that moment linger. So I knew that I had touched something, and so I knew that by reading their faces. And also, there's another thing which is basically reading the energy of a room, right?
Yeah.
Is the energy of the room distracted? Is the energy of the room quiet and people are paying attention? Is the energy of the room lopsided? Maybe one person is paying attention, but the other people aren't. So that all came into. I'm sorry, say again?
You're going to encounter that a lot, the lopsided thing. Just a PSA.
No, absolutely. But by doing that, I was able to craft a really good moment. And I wouldn't have been able to do that had I not been really, really keyed in. That moment could have passed by very quickly, and I could have lost that opportunity. If you guys see what I'm saying.
Yeah. You got to pay attention, right? I mean, I guess that's kind of the gist of the whole concept. Because it's real easy to be very focused on what you've prepared and how's this game going to go, and let me keep track of everything. But if you're doing that to the exclusion of seeing what other people are doing and how they're reacting, you'll slight yourself a little bit.
Do you guys have any moments that you remember in which you were able to kind of read the room and kind of craft something from it?
Oh man, I think the most impactful moment I had while running a game was in Dragon Age. It's in my IDK Probably Bears that I stream with the Worlds Guild. And the premise of the game is going through the war table missions from Dragon Age Inquisition, because it's this team of scouts that we pretty much never see in the video game. But then the major story beats like the attack on Haven and Here Lies the Abyss are all still there because they're crucial moments for the Inquisition as a whole. And so during the attack on Haven, there were some dice rolls made of whether or not certain NPCs survived. And these two NPCs that my players had really attached themselves to, they had this whole backstory that they wrote together for them. It was very sweet, but neither of them made it out. And so then when they got to Skyhold afterward, there was this very like somber moment of, pour one out for Larry and Steve, because they were their favorite NPCs and they're gone now. And that's one of those where it's like, if you're not reading the room, you're just like, all right, moving on to the next thing.
Right.
And they don't get to have their sad moment where they mourn their losses.
Jared, how about yourself, sir?
Well, here's the thing. I'm gonna present maybe the opposite side of
Sure.
what you've been talking about, Rush, because I love that and I wish I was better at it. We've kind of talked before. I'm not the kind of GM that does real great with the whole thinking on the fly thing, looking ahead to other stuff. And a lot of what you're talking about with reading the room really kind of boils down to that. For me, and I don't know if this is sad or not, but I do think it's useful to note. For me, reading the room tends to be less about what's working and more about what's not working. So if I'm doing something and if the combat's gone on just too long, or if this social scene is, okay, we're having fun and we're role playing, but we're just kind of doing the same thing. It's other people are getting distracted, right? Like I'm really role playing with these two players, but these three over here, they're starting to check out. They don't want to. They weren't just on their phones or whatever, but it's like, well, this doesn't really pertain to me and it's not really saying anything, and kind of judging when to let that go on and when to cut that off. For me, reading the room really often tends to be, when do I wrap this up? And just kind of looking at how it's going and how it's feeling. And you go, okay, I need to bring this to a close. And you try to do that without being, ham-fisted or really contrived or whatever. But you go, okay, they've been fighting this combat for a long time. The really dynamic, interesting parts have kind of played out, or they're just kind of on loop. Not really a lot of interest is being added here. He still has 150 hit points. How do I wrap this up, right? And not make it be a slog, but still make it a satisfying story. That's really the art to it, I guess. So for me, that's my reading the room is less about how do I capitalize on the good bits, which I hope I'm doing okay with that. But I don't know, what comes to mind for me most readily is this has kind of gone on a bit too much. We need to move on.
I know. I really like that you highlighted that, because you're right.
Yeah.
It's not just about emphasizing the good bits, but it's going. All right, this has gone on too long. The players are barking up the wrong tree. The players are frustrated. Exactly, just as you said.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I do have a relevance question for you, kind of related to that, and whether you think this is the same thing, right? So I will read the room in hindsight. You were talking about how, if a character or player is really into something, how do I bring that out in the story? As I said, not the best on just doing things on the fly. Or if I do, I often regret it, because I'm like, I rushed that in and I could have done a better job with it. Or, so what I will tend to do is look back on a session or back even on a previous scene and go, there was something really cool there. I need to bring that out more. I need to bring that back. And I will, if I can't think of a way to do it immediately in the game, like for 2 scenes from now, I'll go back in my notes, after the game, and I'll say, so and so really liked that. I read that room in the moment, couldn't do anything with it right then. It didn't. I either couldn't think fast enough, or it didn't make sense, or what. But I'll go back and I'll start going through my notes and go, how can I bring that out more? How can I really play to this thing that these two players are really into? And that's because reading the room is a on the fly kind of thing, and yet it can be useful even if you're in your prep between sessions.
No, I'm really glad that you highlighted that, Jared, because not everybody is good at thinking on the fly necessarily, or there are levels to it. And some people are planners. Some people love to have like plans and pieces in place, and that's just a different style. And so for those kinds of folks, I think you're exactly right. What you do is you take a look at it, and then that's how you work it into your plans when the session is over. And therefore, so if you're not more the spontaneous improv kind of person, you're more of a planner.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly how you do it. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. That was an excellent observation.
Well, and since improv is it's a learned skill as far as I can tell. It's just not what I'm good at learning. For newer,
takes a lot of work.
Yes.
Yeah, for newer GMs who are not, and you'll also find that some people are good at improving different things. I mean, some people are really good at improving plot. Some people are good at improving like conversation, and but anyway, but if we're talking to newer GMs or trying to give advice for people who haven't been doing it a long time, you might be leaning more heavy on the planning bit and less on the making stuff up on the spot. I mean, maybe not.
I also love that you brought up like long slog combats earlier, because I personally I played in one game that was 7 hours long, maybe it was 8, and at least 5 of those hours were one single combat. So this is my advice to all of y'all watching this as a veteran DM. The number of the HP is whatever you make it. Cut it down to get out of this combat. Cut it down, baby. It is gonna be fine. This is me speaking to your soul. That's it.
I've been guilty of that. I've been guilty of that. Where I was like, no, we got to do it. And
well, it depends on the people you're playing with and what they value about the game. But that said, 9 times out of 10, I think Abby is right. And I think that if you just go, I think he's beat up. And remember, not everything fights to the death, right? He might still have 150 hit points and go, oh, this just isn't worth it anymore. I mean, there's story ways you can address this without being like, oh, look, he's suddenly dead. Yeah, I mean, right? So
that's actually a great point. I mean, the guy can, if it's if it's foregone conclusion, he can try to run.
Yeah.
And even if that means he's going to die when he tries to run, that's fine. Then he dies when he tries to run, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay. So great points. So let's talk about how reading the room plays into consent.
Okay.
This is something that I learned the hard way when I started game mastering professionally. So when it comes to consent, there's a big, huge push right now on the all over the role-playing community to have consent tools. And just to go over some quickly, so for example, have cards written. Give everybody a card with an X and an O on it, and if something is happening that people are uncomfortable with, they can pass the game master an X. Or if there's something that's happening that they're excited about, they can pass an O to the game master, or even text an X or an O to the game master's phone. So those are some examples, and there's lots of other examples to kind of set up your game for consent and so prevent triggers from happening. Now that said, my issue that I've seen is that 99% of the time a game master is not going to go there anyway because you're taking a serious risk. So most game masters don't want to go there anyway. If they do, then it's probably going to be a very different game. Let's say a game involving serial killers or something else like that. And then there's a different conversation before the game even starts. So, but where I personally have breached consent before by accident was by having moments in the game that everything is fine, but everything is according to what we and the party agreed upon beforehand. But then something happens that I didn't see, the player didn't see, none of the other players saw. So there was no opportunity to put out a card with an X on it. There was no opportunity to do any of that. So let me give you a key example. There was a D&D party. They were stopping by this abbey to try to warn them that Banshee was coming. The Banshee shows up and they begin fighting the Banshee. Now, the abbey was where they were training lots of young paladins. So most of the young paladins who were in training were teenage boys. And the Banshee screams. Most of the vast majority of the acolytes die. And so one of the players was very traumatized that she couldn't save all these teenage boys, and she had a son who's she had a difficult time raising, and then became very successful. But this is why that really hit her in the heart. Yeah, go ahead.
As a player, you're talking about, not as the character, because some players would really think that, oh, I can really role play the tragedy of it, and my character can be really traumatized and distraught. But what you're saying is the player was affected by that in a negative way.
Yes, the player was affected by that in a negative way. So the consent tools weren't useful because she didn't need, this is the thing, she didn't even know that would be possibly traumatic until it happened.
Right.
So she was like, okay, this is fine. We're fighting a Banshee. Of course there are teenage boys here. That makes sense because they're in training to be paladins. There was nothing that alerted to her to the problem, nor me. So here's where reading the room can really help with issues of consent. So for one, before you begin your campaign, what is the tenor of your group? Is the tenor of your group like a PG? Are we going to need to do a PG game? Maybe a PG-13, maybe rated R? You need to take the litmus test of your room. Don't be worried about your personal story. You might have this great story in mind, but is it appropriate to your group? Take a litmus test of your group first. So for that same group, for example, we're currently playing in Ravenloft, but it is not nearly as horrible and horrifying and scary as Ravenloft can be. I've deliberately toned it down so that it's an adventure game with gothic trappings. Right.
And that's set in town.
Yes. So I deliberately tuned the tone that way because I took a read of the room before the campaign even started. Now, let's say you had the incident, what I was talking about with the Abbey. One thing that helped me was I immediately saw that the energy drained out of this player immediately. So I was able to tell, this person is upset.
So
we were able to slow that. She didn't want to stop the game. She wanted to keep going. So we kept going, but we immediately slowed down the game. The game took on a different tone. It was a lot more about grieving. The other players came in because they also obviously saw the energy drain out of this player. And so everybody kind of came together and was able to kind of help heal. So that was a very obvious thing that happened because everybody noticed right away. But the reason I'm sharing this with you guys is, let's say it's not as noticeable, where something happens to a player and they're a bit uncomfortable, but not so much that it's blindingly obvious. It is very helpful to read the energy of a player and notice a sudden change. Do you guys have any comments? I want to let you guys chime in.
Because I play online more often than not, and often with people I don't know super well, it's a little weird to kind of get those reads on people. Like if you know your friends really well, when even the smallest eye twitch is like, oh, are you okay? But with people online that I only know through TikTok cosplaying different characters, it's like I don't know what your little tell is. I don't know your body language that well yet. Plus I only see this part of your body. So I can't see if your leg is tapping. In person, one of the best tools for that in-game, hey, let's just slow our roll, is the red, yellow, green. But then the question for online gamers becomes, how do we implement this in a way that isn't broadcasted to everybody that could possibly be watching this game, if we want to just keep it between either the player and the DM or the player and the table?
Right. Usually when I'm playing online, people are messaging me all the time.
Yeah.
So obviously, I actually find it a little easier online to do it because the chat box is right there.
Mhm.
I sometimes when I'm playing live, actually sometimes I forget to look at my phone,
Right.
or
That's
sometimes
the one for me.
it's actually what's interesting is when I'm playing live, even though we live in a texting society, it is easier for me to pass or take a card from someone than it is to send out a text. I have no idea why, but it's just a lot easier for me if someone slips me a card for me to read the card and for me to write on a card and hand it over. Again,
Definitely.
don't know why. Maybe the screen like absorbs all of my attention, made like a magnifying glass or something. I don't know. But
I also think having used different streaming platforms that are varying levels of difficulty, the focus tends to be like, okay, I have to tell this story and I have to stream it and make sure that the stream is working okay. And also just do the general, read the room, read the table stuff while running the game. And so it becomes all of these different pieces to sort of keep in mind. And for example, like if I pull my Discord video box, I can't check Discord text on my computer. I have to check it on my phone. Otherwise, all of Twitch will see my Discord chat.
Gotcha. Right.
And so then that sort of becomes the question. With things like StreamYard, where you have the private chat right next to your screen, that's a little bit easier to work with because you can see both at the same time, and it's not going to show up for the whole world to see.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking, is just trying to juggle the stuff. And sometimes when people pass me a card,
music, just
I'm getting back into that. Just one more thing, right? I've had people pass me a card, like a physical card, and I've forgotten about it. So the reading the room is important. So, but the reading the room is like, that's like a passive thing, right? Like you're trying to pay attention and see what's going on, especially when it comes to things like consent tools and that sort of thing. If there's like an issue, I have no problem with you interrupting the game. But again, maybe you're not comfortable doing that. But for me as a GM, I would always want to be very clear that, hey, if this is too much or you're not having fun with this or whatever, if it's distressing to you, especially, absolutely say, hey, can we do something different? This is weirding me out, right? And not in a good way. Because, yeah. But and if it's not that severe, then okay, between sessions, say, hey, can we do less of this? It's kind of like, I don't really care for that, right? There's levels to all of this.
That's sort of your stars.
Reading the room will help you, like with what Rush was saying, when you've got that person who is uncomfortable, but doesn't want to be a killjoy, doesn't want to get in the way, is too socially introverted to want to interject or say anything. So yeah, the chat thing is great, but we're human, and it's possible that you're not going to see that or not going to see it in time or whatever. And Abby, you made a really good point about if these are not people you know well. I mostly only play with people I know really well. So these are conversations we don't have explicitly often. But if you're playing with people you don't know very well, and you don't know kind of the things that bug them or what's, maybe too far stuff about their history, that sort of thing.
Right.
I think maybe you got to pay more attention to that kind of stuff. If you're
about that, Abby, with playing with people that you don't know as well. That's why I think it is before you start playing, because I've been in that situation as well. Before you start playing, you chat a little bit. How was your day? How's everything been going? Right. Oh, okay, that's wonderful. What do you do? And where do you live?
So like every session, do this. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yeah. Well, but especially if you don't know the folks, to
Right.
kind of start taking the read of the room that way, A. And then B, what I've found very helpful for myself is if it's a bunch of people I don't know, then I immediately am going to tone everything down. So I have a
Yeah.
great story related to exactly what you said, Abby. I recently ran a game for someone I know professionally, don't know them personally, and was for a bunch of people I don't know. It's a murder mystery. So it's a D&D murder mystery. This old widow passed away and left a bunch of people her property. And the old widow, to set it up, is a necromancer. So I said, this could possibly even sort of be kind of So I immediately started adding a few elements to kind of lighten the mood. So for example, first of all, okay, she's a necromancer, but she's not raising her, dead grandchildren. She usually uses her magic to talk to people's lost loved ones or try to find the remains of somebody's will. So I immediately started toning it down that way. And then there's a room you can go into where she summoned up somebody to ask him about where he kept the money that he buried, and then she passed away. So he's kind of stuck there, like twiddling his thumbs, and so it became a funny encounter because he's like, "Excuse me, oh, when can I get out of here?" So I immediately I put that in there though to kind of lighten the mood, to change the tone, to immediately kind of pull it back just in case, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if it's a bunch of people and you don't know your audience that well, then you need to say to yourself, what if this happens? What if that happens? So just in case, I'm going to introduce these elements to kind of change the tone.
And two things. So there's an RPG consent checklist PDF that goes around pretty regularly. And it's something that I use for all of my games. One of the things at the top is ratings. Rush, you mentioned the PG, PG-13, or even rated R. Mm-hmm. And there's also a box on that sheet that kind of is like, what is this going to be like? And so I like to pull from pop culture and be like, okay, this is going to be kind of like Avatar: The Last Airbender meets She-Ra kind of a vibe. Or this is going to be a Dragon Age dark fantasy. When I started running my Dragon Age games, I was like, listen, this is the Dragon Age universe. These are the things that Dragon Age universe includes. Some of these are not going to be as prevalent in my games. Some of them will be there. But this is the Dragon Age universe. So if you don't want to play in this universe, tell me now.
Right.
Another thing I do is anytime I write something, one shot, a module, a episode, a session, whatever, that has anything I think might be triggering, even down to spiders, I'm like, content warnings for this game include. Tell me if this is a problem.
Yeah.
Because if it's like spiders, I can swap that out, no problem.
Right.
But I also have the shot I ran that ended up being 2-3 hour sessions for a total of 6. That the whole point of that is a flooding of a valley. And it's like, just FYI, flooding, refugees, and drowning are your content warnings. There is no story without these.
Right.
Yeah.
So some of them are swappable, some of them are not.
Right. And you just got to say, is this, like Rush even said earlier, if you have questions about, is this the right game for this group? Because there's, like you said, there's no story without those. So you might go, oh, I was going to do this thing about this flood and this, and then you kind of get together with the people that you're playing with and you go, yeah, maybe not for this group. So Rush, what you were saying, like, are you saying like the less you know people, I guess, the more you play it safe in terms of that sort of, I mean, that sounds like absolute common sense, right? But I think that's really important to mention. I think maybe the caveat to that maybe plays into what Abby was saying is if the point of the game is to be, if you're running horror, or the point of the game is to be a very certain thing that some people might like, then maybe you let them self-select a bit and you say, hey, I'm running this game. It's going to be like this. Is that what you want to do? Right. And so you can approach it that way and you can say, here's the game I'm running. Are you in or out? Or you can say, what kind of game do you want to run? So the D&D game that I'm currently running, when we talked about starting this, why I was kind of polling the room and kind of saying, hey, what kind of D&D game do you want to do? Because you can go a lot of ways with that. And what we kind of landed on was we wanted like high adventure, right? So we don't want to get too bogged down with political intrigue. We don't want to get, I mean, this is just even interest stuff, not even like triggering stuff. But I mean, these are conversations that are very useful to have just to make sure everybody's going to have fun. Because if I run heavy political intrigue for the guy who just wants to kill goblins, he's not going to have as much, a good time. And like in the same way, if I'm going to run this creepy horror game with ghost spiders for someone who's really traumatized by spiders and ghosts, like maybe that's not the game I should be pitching.
No, I really like that, Jared. That's basically reading the room, as I said before, way beforehand.
Right.
But you got into a lot more how you do it. And you just talk to your players, like what kind of game are you wanting? What kind of things are wanting to do? And reading in between the lines of what they say, because they may say one thing but mean another, or a lot of times you get, well, I don't know, whatever.
You have to do that. You have to read between the lines.
Yes.
If you ever ask for feedback. And even I like the safety tools, Abby, but even on those, one of the things that comes to my mind is that's anybody that's ever done any kind of research, that people what they'll write down is not a perfect reflection of
course,
what they want and how they are. And so what Rush was saying earlier about being able to know, well, yeah, we said we were on board. Yes, we were going to do this horror game with the ghost spiders. And then it like actually happens and you see in their eyes the I've made a mistake kind of look. Mm-hmm. You got to be prepared for that.
Yes, which all goes back into reading the room. So I think this really, really sums it all up very well. And so I think we're out of time, actually. So let's go ahead and sign off with where you can find us in social media, Abby.
Yeah, thank you everyone so much for watching. If you want to see more of these, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also follow us at The Table Dragon on Twitter or DragonCon_tabletop on Instagram for other updates, both related to videos like these and the convention at large.
Jared?
Yeah.
Can people follow you on Twitter?
I mean, if they really want to, yeah. You can find me at Penguin Sushi on Twitter. It's mostly where I hang out in terms of social media. Also on Instagram and stuff, but that's kind of the handle I've adopted for the last couple of decades.
You can follow me on Instagram at Six Gun Robot, and of course, you can follow this channel. And until later, please remember that dice were rolled, roles were played, and play was fun. And what else is there in life if not play? See you later.